Hello guys, if you're seeing this video is a re-upload of the first video on the first way. Because I added several adjustments to it, like editing some slides, but really I would still recommend watching the first video. It's in my playlist still, I just unlisted it. But in this video, I've just added really a more simplistic way of arguments. So there's three types that I provide. There's one in the end, that's the, I think, more complete one. And let's get started. Okay, so just some clarifications before I get to the argument. Thomas Aquinas does not believe God's existence is self-evident to us. And so Aquinas states, on the contrary, no one can mentally admit the opposite of what is self-evident. As the philosopher in the Metaphysics, book 4, lecture 6 states concerning the first principles of demonstration. But the opposite of the proposition God can be mentally admitted. The fool said in his heart, there is no God, and Aquinas cites a Bible verse. And so therefore, that God exists is not self-evident. Now, the philosopher Aquinas is referencing is Aristotle, right? And so St. Thomas Aquinas distinguishes two senses of self-evident. That is, self-evident in of itself and self-evident to us. And so, a proposition is self-evident because the predicate is contained in the essence of the subject. Consider the example St. Thomas Aquinas gives. Man is an animal. The predicate is already contained in the essence of man. So if everybody understands both what you're talking about and what you're saying about it, then the statement will obviously be true to everyone and self-evident. This is true regarding the first principles of demonstration, that is, the law of identity and law of non-contradiction. But if there is something like the predicate's essence and subject is unknown, the proposition is thus self-evident in of itself, but not to those who do not understand or know the meaning of the predicate and the subject of the proposition. So from this, Aquinas concludes that the proposition that God exists is self-evident in of itself, but not to us, because existence is God's essence. Right? But why is God not self-evident according to Aquinas? It's because we do not know the essence of God, and we cannot mentally conceive of it. And thus, it isn't self-evident to us, but it can be demonstrated by things more known to us. And what Aquinas means by this, he is talking about we know God through effects or posteriority. And so, the statement God exists is still self-evident in of itself because God's essence is existence, so basically God's essence is to exist. Right. And so remember, Aquinas and Aristotle believe that you must derive the prior from the posterior at times. And Aquinas also has other reasons to why God's existence is not self-evident, but this is not the point of the video. Alright, so Aquinas believes that God cannot be proved a priori, so he rejects ontological arguments. Ontological arguments try to prove God's existence by definition or as a priori, that is independent of empirical justification. But Aquinas believes that God can only be demonstrated through posteriori means, meaning effects and empirical justification. Alright, here's the famous argument in the Summa Theologiae. There's also one in the Summa Contra Gentiles, but I will probably cover that in another video. So St. Thomas states in the Summa Theologiae, I answer that the existence of God can be proved in 5 ways. The first and more manifest way is the argument from motion. It is certain and evident to our senses that in the world some things are in motion. Now whatever is in motion is put in motion by another, for nothing can be in motion except as it is in potentiality to that towards which it is in motion, whereas a thing moves inasmuch as it is in act. For motion is nothing else than the reduction of something from potentiality to actuality, but nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. Thus that which is actually hot, as fire, makes wood, which is potentially hot, to be actually hot, and thereby moves and changes it. Now it is not possible that the same thing should be at once in actuality and potentiality in the same respect, but only in different respects. For what is actually hot cannot be simultaneously be potentially hot, but it is simultaneously potentially cold. It is therefore impossible that in the same respect and in the same way, a thing should be both mover and moved, that is, it should move itself. Therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. So, Summa Theologiae, question 2, article 3. Here's another way to put the argument. I got this from a website. The argument here formulated is: some things in the world undergo change. Change is the reduction of potency to act. That which is changed cannot cause the change itself. 4. The thing A, which brought about a change C in another B, itself is either pure act or composed of act and potency. 5. If it is composed of act and potency, A needs an actualizing force behind its existence. 6. This causal series of changes is per se, as opposed to per accidents, which I will define later. And 7. These series per se cannot be infinitely long. 8. These series necessarily terminate in pure actuality, and this pure actuality is God. And here's the other version. All bodies are either potentially in motion or actually in motion, but nothing can be reduced from potentiality to actuality except by something in a state of actuality. 3. Nothing can be at once in both actuality and potentiality in the same respect. And 4. Therefore, nothing can be at once in both actuality and potentiality with respect to motion. And 5. Therefore, nothing can move itself. It must be put in motion by something else. 6. If there were no first mover, moved by no other, there would be no motion. But there is motion. And 8. Therefore, there is a first mover named God. Now, note that Aquinas' first way of proving God's existence is based on the premise that whatever is in motion is put in motion by another. So Aquinas also says nothing can be in motion unless it is potential to that which it moves towards. So what does this mean? Now remember, the term motion is interchangeable, and Aquinas just means change by motion. And so let me give you an example. So consider a cold mug. It can only potentially become hot, and when it becomes hot, it must come from something that's already actually hot, like fire. The hot mug, in this case, is the actuality of the potentially hot mug. Now, actuality means a thing's obtaining or being in a state of fulfillment, and potentiality is known as the principle of change as defined by Aristotle in the Metaphysics. Now, a thing moves only insofar as it is in act, meaning that it must have something real already or active about it, because if it didn't, this would be known as prime matter, that is, pure potentiality. And now prime matter is when we think of matter without form, and in itself it is indefinable. And so for Aquinas, prime matter is not something that's actually existing because it's pure potency, since it has no act giving it existence. It's just an incomplete mode of existence, basically. Sorry about that. Now, here's a key claim or principle in Thomistic philosophy. That is, change is the reduction from potentiality to actuality. And whatever is reduced from potential to actual requires an external thing, and that thing must be already actual itself. For example, a man can only come from a man, an apple from an apple. An object at rest can only come into motion by something that's already in motion. Another example, heat from an oven, which is already actual, must act upon a rubber ball to actualize its potential for melting. And so a thing also cannot be both actual and potential in the same respect at the same time. This would violate the law of non-contradiction, and thus nothing can actualize itself because it would be more eminent than itself, which is again a contradiction. And so nothing can move itself in the same respect at the same time. So therefore, whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another. A wood log cannot be simultaneously actually hot and simultaneously potentially hot via LNC, that is the law of non-contradiction. The wood also cannot just cause itself to become hot, because then it would imply that it would be more eminent than itself, which we have established is impossible. And therefore, it must become hot because of another thing that's actually already hot. Or in other words, to finally wrap this up, no thing can be in both act and in potential towards something in the same respect at the same time. Thus, if a potential were to actualize itself, it would be actual and potential to something it moves towards, which is a impossibility and a contradiction. Now, so since Aquinas has now established that whatever is in motion must be put in motion by another, he says this cannot go on to infinity, because then there would be no first mover, and logically no other movers, because the other movers only move in virtue as they are being put in motion by the first mover. Example, the stick only moves because it is put in motion by the hand. Or another example, the rock is only moving because the stick is pushing it, and the stick is only moving because the hand is pushing it. Now, this is where Aquinas gets crucial, because we have to distinguish two types of causal series. That is, a per se causal chain and an accidental causal chain, also known as essential order versus accidental order series of causes. Now, Thomas Aquinas in this argument is utilizing the essential order or per se causal chain. So what is a per se causal chain or an essentially ordered series of causes? And Duns Scotus, a famous Scottish priest and a famous scholastic theologian, lays this distinction out really well in the Ordinatio and the Treatise on First Principle. He says, in essentially ordered causes, the second depends on the first in its act of causation. In accidentally ordered causes, this is not the case, although the second may depend upon the first for its existence in some other way. So for example, a essentially ordered series of causes is like this. Consider the example, a rock is moving, but it's only moving because the stick is pushing it, and the stick is only pushing it because it's being moved by a hand. And so basically the members in a essentially ordered or per se causal series depend on each other for their causal powers. But in accidental series, they don't. For example, a grandson doesn't depend on his grandfather for his causal power. Even though the grandson depends on the grandfather for his existence. There is an essential connection. Duns Scotus once again states, there is an essential connection between the members of the series qua members insofar as the members lower down in the series have their causal powers. For as long as the series exists, only insofar as they derive it up from a member higher up. So, he once again states, in essentially ordered causes, the causality is of another nature and order, inasmuch as the higher cause is more perfect. Such is not the case, however, with accidentally ordered causes. Now, Scotus also makes another interesting point, and he says that the causes in an essential order will have a hierarchy of eminence, or nature. So some causes will have a more perfect nature than the others, like my hand is a higher nature than the stick. And so, Duns Scotus once again states that all essentially ordered causes are simultaneously required to cause the effect, for otherwise some causality essential to the effect would be wanting. In accidentally ordered causes this is not so, because there is no need of simultaneity in causing inasmuch as each possesses independently of the other the perfection of causality with regard to its own effect. So in an essential order series of causes, the causation is happening simultaneously, or basically the causes are sustaining each other. Because if my hand wasn't pushing the stick, then the stick cannot move the rock, and the rock wouldn't be moving because the stick is not pushing it. But this is not the case for accidental series. Now, according to Aquinas, it is possible for a per accidens causal chain to go on to infinity in time. But here's an important note. Aquinas is not trying to prove in the first way that the universe has a cause, but he's actually trying to prove a thing that's keeping it in existence. Now, since we've already noted that Aquinas believes it is possible for a per accidens causal chain to go on to infinity in time, Aquinas argues that a per se, in contrast, cannot go on to infinity. So why? Well, by definition, in a per se causal chain, members only move in virtue of prior members. And if there was an infinity as defined in Aristotle's Metaphysics, Book 5, an infinity has no end or beginning, and so there would be no first thing. And thus, there would be no first mover, and ultimately, that means there really is no effect or causation or motion or change. And so Aquinas concludes then that there must be a first mover that is itself unmoved, who we call and understand as God. This necessarily follows because if there is no infinite regress, then the causal chain must terminate into some first mover or actualizer that is pure act. Now some might obviously object, saying, why must it be God and not some other random thing or entity? But it breaks down when you understand what it means to be pure act. Now, Now, with being pure act, there follows several divine attributes. For example, this prime mover would have no matter, or is immaterial, because matter has the potential to be affected. This being has no passive potential, that is, potential to be moved. This first mover also has to be eternal, since it didn't just randomly come out of existence, and it can't just pop out of existence because this requires change. And this mover has to also be outside of time, because if it was moving in time, it would be changing. And then, adhering to divine simplicity, make sure you try to watch my prior video on divine simplicity. This being must be absolutely simple, with no type of composition at all, because to be a composite necessitates a composer to even arrange those parts, and therefore implies potential in that being. And so this first mover's essence is pure existence. Its essence is its existence. His essence is the absence of all division. Now, in the De Ente, which is on being an essence, Aquinas says that whatever has its essence separate from its existence can only potentially exist, not actually. And so this first mover or prime mover does not have its essence distinct from its existence because it has no potential, right? Now, can there be multiple first movers? I mean, Aristotle even posited 47 to 55 first movers in the Metaphysics. Sorry, I just had to get a drink. And so, Aquinas and obviously other scholastics like Scotus and Cajetan say, no, this is not the case. There cannot be multiple movers or gods, right? And so Aquinas and Scotus argue that if there was multiple first movers or multiple first principles or natures, they would have to differ necessarily from each other, or from some differentiate that specificates them. So Scotus argues that if they have to depend on this differentiate to be distinguished from other first movers, then they really don't have necessary existence, because necessary existence is defined as not being dependent on anything else. And so Aquinas puts it, if then many gods existed, they would necessarily differ from each other. Something therefore would belong to one which did not belong to another. And so this is a problem because first movers are absolutely simple with no composition at all. If there was a differentiate, then it implies a part that differentiates first movers, which contradicts absolute divine simplicity. And so a being that is actus purus is unique, and there's only one type of this nature, and only one being of this nature. And so in my previous video, the first being must contain every perfection because pure actuality lacks any potential. Meaning, for example, the prime mover must be all-knowing because it has no potential to know something. It must be all-powerful because it lacks potential to gain power. And so Aquinas argues that God must also be an intelligent being because intelligent things are seen as more powerful than all other things. And so therefore God has to be intelligent. And to wrap this video up, an additional thing, if you guys want a complete version of this argument, I wrote it out and this is in the next slide. This one I think is more complete. So it's pretty long though. So premise 1, change is evident to the senses. Change is the actualization of potentiality, that is, the reduction from potential to act. 3, a thing is in potential relative to what it can become. And 4, a thing can only actualize insofar as it is in act. For A, anything entirely without act would be prime matter, which does not actually exist independently but only has an incomplete mode of being. And 5, no thing can be both in act and in potential in the same respect and at the same time. 5a, proof of this is that a fire cannot be both potentially hot and actually hot in the same respect via the law of non-contradiction. 6, therefore, the actualization of a potential must be caused by something already actual. And 6a, consider the example, wood becomes hot because something actually hot, like fire, makes it so. 7, therefore whatever is in motion is moved by another. 7a, no potential can actualize itself, for this would imply that it is more perfect than itself, violating the law of identity. And 7b, if a thing actualized itself, it would be both actual and potential in the same respect, which is impossible and a contradiction. 8, all motion or actualization occurs in a per se causal chain where intermediate movers only move insofar as they are moved by prior movers. 9. There cannot be an infinite regress in a per se causal chain. 9a. If there were an infinite regress, there would be no first mover, and hence no subsequent motion would occur as the intermediate movers derive their motion from the first. 9b. In an infinite regress, there would be no priority or posteriority, since these terms require a beginning and an end for their definition, which an infinite series lacks. And 10. A per se causal chain cannot be circular. And 10a, a circular per se causal chain would make some causes prior and posterior to themselves, which is a contradiction. And 11, therefore, a per se causal chain of motion must terminate in a being that is pure act, that is, actus purus, having no potentiality. 12, a being that is pure act must be immaterial. 12a, matter is potentiality because it can be otherwise and moved, and it can also be affected, but a pure act being lacks potentiality. And 13, a pure act being must be all-knowing and all-powerful. 13a, it cannot potentially know something, it must already actually know everything, hence it is omniscient. And 13b, it cannot potentially gain power, it must already be fully actual, hence it is omnipotent. 14, this pure act being must also be intelligent and rational. 14a, among beings, those with intelligence are more perfect than those without, and so therefore the highest being, that is pure act, must possess intelligence. 15, this being must be absolutely simple, that is non-composite. 15a, composition implies dependency and potentiality, as parts can be separated or changed. A pure act being cannot depend on anything else and cannot have potentiality. 16, this pure act, absolutely simple, intelligent, omniscient, omnipotent, immaterial being is who we understand as and call God. And that's basically to sum that up. And that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Thank you for watching. Definitely I will cover more arguments in the future, like the De Ente argument, and the other ways, but this is just one of the ways why Aquinas is one of the greatest philosophers of all time. And in my previous video, I have mentioned how the Lord Jesus Christ, one day when Thomas Aquinas was praying under the crucifix, the Lord Jesus Christ on the crucifix came to life and told Thomas, "Thomas, you have written very well of me. What do you desire?" And St. Thomas Aquinas states that, "Non nisi te Domine," which means nothing but you, Lord. And that's basically to sum it up.